Right, you want to become a bread baker, not the backyard sourdough hobby, the real thing. Your own bakery, your name above the door, the smell of fresh bread pulling people in before they even know they're hungry. And honestly, who wouldn't want this? Everybody eats bread. Nobody's cutting it from their life to save money. You picture the early morning ritual becoming a kind of meditation. The loyal regulars who show up every Saturday for the same order, the satisfaction of turning flour and water into something people build their mornings around. That's the picture. That's what the artisan bakery content and the golden hour Instagram reels sell you. And the numbers back up the dream, at least at first glance. The bakery industry in America generates over $46 billion a year. A single well-run neighborhood bakery can move $30,000 to $50,000 in product a month. It feels like the closest thing to alchemy left in business, turning flour and water into a line out the door. Here's what those numbers don't show you on their own. Out of every dollar that walks through that door, the person who owns the bakery keeps somewhere between 5 and 15 cents. Thin, but real. And here's the part that matters most. The bakers who understand exactly where those cents come from are the ones who build something that lasts for decades. It's rarely the recipe that decides who makes it. It's whether they understood the real math before they signed a lease, or learned it the hard way after. So which one are you? The person who falls for the golden hour photo, or the person willing to ask the harder questions and do the actual math first? Let's start with something worth sitting with before we go anywhere near a business plan. Why does this particular dream pull at people so hard? It's not really about the bread, not at first. It's about being trusted with something people build their whole day around. Think about it. Nobody remembers who sold them their phone charger, but people remember their baker. There's something almost sacred about that kind of relationship with a customer, earned one perfect loaf at a time. For some people, it's a craft they fell in love with and never wanted to put down. For others, it's the appeal of building something with your hands in a world that increasingly runs on screens. Either way, it's a genuinely beautiful thing to want. So here's the real first question. If the dream is beautiful, why do so many people who chase it end up disappointed? Not because the bread wasn't good, but because they never learned the one skill that actually determines whether a bakery survives. Here's that skill, and it's the single biggest thing that separates the bakers who build lasting businesses from the ones who quietly struggle. Understanding waste before it understands you. Think about what a bakery actually is for a moment. Every single item on that shelf is racing a clock. A croissant isn't like a t-shirt sitting on a rack for a year. It has hours, not months, before it stops being sellable at full price. So here's a question worth asking yourself honestly. Have you ever actually thought about what happens to the bread that doesn't sell by closing time? Because the bakers who build thriving businesses have an answer to that question before they ever open their doors, and the ones who struggle usually don't think about it until they're already losing money to it every single day. This isn't a scary fact to discourage you, it's actually good news, because it means the difference between struggling and thriving is learnable. It's not talent, it's not luck, it's simply knowing where to look. So before you pick a location or design a logo, there's a decision that shapes everything else about this business. What kind of bakery are you actually building? Are you picturing a small storefront, the kind of place people walk into for a croissant and a coffee on their way to work, a retail-first model built on daily foot traffic? Or are you picturing something that supplies other businesses, restaurants, cafes, grocery stores, where your bread never even touches a retail shelf but shows up on someone else's menu every single day? These aren't two versions of the same job. A retail bakery lives and dies on walk-in traffic, location, and the customer experience the moment someone steps through your door. A wholesale-focused operation lives on relationships, contracts, and delivery logistics, a completely different rhythm, often with steadier, more predictable income once it's established. Ask yourself honestly, does the dream you're picturing involve customers you get to know by name, or a delivery van and a handful of steady restaurant accounts? Because the answer changes almost everything about how you should actually build this. And here's something worth knowing before you commit to either path. The bakers who build the most resilient businesses rarely pick just one. A hybrid model, a retail storefront that also supplies 2 or 3 local restaurants or cafes, gives you something powerful. 2 completely different revenue rhythms that don't rise and fall together. When a slow retail week happens, and it will, a standing wholesale order doesn't care that foot traffic was light. So here's a serious question worth sitting with early. Are you building a business with one source of income, or are you building in some resilience from day one? Now let's talk about where you're actually going to do this, because this is where the fantasy usually meets its first real decision point. You essentially have three paths in front of you. You could start in a shared commercial kitchen, a space you rent time in alongside other food businesses, which dramatically lowers your upfront cost and lets you build a customer base and prove your concept before you ever sign a long-term lease. You could lease and build out your own dedicated retail storefront, which costs significantly more but gives you full control over your brand, your hours, and your customer experience. Or you could go for a full commercial production facility, built primarily to supply wholesale accounts, which requires the most capital but scales the furthest. So here's a question worth asking yourself honestly. Are you trying to prove this business works before you risk everything on it, or are you someone who needs to see the full vision realized on day one to feel like it's real? Because there's no wrong answer here, but there's a wrong answer for you specifically, and it's worth knowing which one before you sign anything. Let's actually talk numbers now, because this is where most people either get genuinely excited or genuinely nervous, and either reaction is fine as long as it's grounded in the real figures instead of a guess. Starting in a shared commercial kitchen is the leanest path, often costing somewhere between $15,000 and $50,000 to get going, covering your kitchen rental time, basic equipment you bring yourself, initial ingredients, packaging, permits, and a modest marketing push. This is how a lot of successful bakery owners actually start, proving their product and building a customer base before they take on the risk of a full lease. A full retail storefront is a different scale entirely. Depending on your city and the size of the space, you're realistically looking at somewhere between $150,000 and $400,000 or more. Location matters enormously here. Opening in California or New York can push you toward the top of that range, while a market like Texas or Georgia might land you closer to $50,000 to $150,000 for a comparable space. So here's a question worth asking. Have you actually researched what this costs in your specific city? Or have you been picturing a number from a bakery you saw online in a completely different market? Equipment is one of the biggest line items no matter which path you choose, typically representing 30 to 50% of your total startup cost. A single commercial oven alone can run anywhere from a few $1,000s for something basic to tens of thousands for something built to handle real volume. Add mixers, proofing cabinets, refrigeration, display cases, and you can see how this adds up fast. New equipment across the board can easily run $20,000 to $50,000, though buying used from restaurant liquidation sales or auctions can meaningfully cut that number, if you're willing to put in the extra work of sourcing it. Then there's the build-out itself if you're leasing a retail space. Light renovations might run $5,000 to $15,000, but if your space needs real infrastructure work, proper ventilation, hood systems, plumbing for a commercial kitchen, a full renovation can exceed $50,000 on its own. And permits and licensing, while smaller in comparison, still add up. A business license, food handler permits, a health department inspection, and a food establishment permit typically run $500 to $3,000 combined, though it varies by state and county. Add it up, and even a lean commercial bakery startup is looking at somewhere between $80,000 and $200,000 in most markets before you sell your first loaf. Not because bakers are careless with money, because that's genuinely what it costs to build something real. So here's a serious question worth sitting with. Do you have that kind of capital ready or a real plan for financing it? And just as importantly, do you have enough left over to actually operate for the months it takes to build a customer base, because startup costs are only half the picture? Once you're open, the real ongoing test begins, and this is where understanding the numbers becomes the thing that actually protects you. Ingredients, your food cost, typically run 28 to 35% of revenue. Labor, especially because baking demands early starts, and skilled hands, typically runs another 30 to 35%. Add those together, and you're already at somewhere between 58 and 70% of your revenue before rent, utilities, marketing, or anything else. That's simply the shape of this business. And once you know that shape, you can actually plan around it instead of being surprised by it. Here's where the real opportunity lives, and it's the single most useful thing you can learn before you open. Waste is the one major cost category you have direct, daily control over. The bakeries that struggle most often lose somewhere around 10 to 15% of their ingredients to waste, overproduction, spoilage, items that simply didn't sell. The bakeries that thrive keep that number under 3%. Through tighter production planning, smart day-old pricing instead of throwing product away, and paying close attention to what actually sells on which day of the week. And here's the genuinely encouraging part. Every single percentage point you shave off that waste number can improve your net margin by roughly a third to half a percent. That might sound small until you realize it compounds every single day, all year, forever. So here's a question worth sitting with. Are you the kind of person who tracks numbers closely enough to catch that kind of leak early? Or does that sound like the boring part of the dream you'd rather skip? Because that boring part is often the actual difference between a bakery that survives its first 2 years and one that doesn't. So let's talk about what those margins actually add up to. Most bakery owners land somewhere around 5 to 15% net profit after all expenses, thin by a lot of industry standards, but real and genuinely livable once you're at scale. The bakeries that manage their waste tightly, price their products from real cost rather than guesswork, and build in some wholesale or catering revenue can push that up toward 20 to 25%, which starts to look like a genuinely strong small business. Here's what that means in real numbers put together. Say you're running a mid-sized retail bakery, doing $35,000 a month in sales, a realistic, healthy number for an established neighborhood spot. That's $420,000 a year. At a solid 10% net margin, you're netting around $42,000 a year for yourself. Add a modest wholesale relationship, supplying bread to 2 or 3 local restaurants or cafes, which can bring in another $4,000 to $8,000 a month in fairly predictable revenue. And you're not just adding income, you're adding stability, because that revenue doesn't depend on daily foot traffic the way your storefront sales do. Now here's the honest version of a tugger stretch, because every business has them, and knowing what one looks like in advance is exactly how you prepare for it, instead of panicking through it. Say a slow season hits, maybe a new competitor opens nearby, maybe a stretch of bad weather keeps foot traffic down for a few weeks. Your retail sales dip by 15%. If you've got nothing else going, that dip hits your bottom line hard because your rent and your labor costs don't dip along with it. But if you've built that wholesale relationship in already, those steady restaurant orders keep coming in regardless of how foot traffic looks that week, cushioning the exact kind of dip that sinks a business with only one source of income. That's not luck. That's a decision you made months earlier, before you even knew you'd need it. And here's a question worth asking yourself honestly, because it separates people who build lasting businesses from people who get discouraged and walk away. Are you building in that kind of resilience from the start, or are you planning to figure it out only once you need it? Let's talk about what the actual day-to-day looks like, because this is the part the golden hour reels never show you. It starts early, genuinely early, often 3 or 4 in the morning, because bread needs time, and customers want it fresh when they walk in at 7. That's not a grind to dread. For a lot of bakers, that quiet, focused early morning work is actually the best part of the job. The part with no phone calls and no distractions, just you and the dough. But it does mean asking yourself honestly, are you someone who can build a sustainable rhythm around that schedule? Or does it sound romantic, right up until the alarm actually goes off at 3:30? Beyond the baking itself, there's the business side that never fully stops. Tracking which items sold out and which sat in the case. Adjusting tomorrow's production based on today's numbers, managing a small team who also need to show up at those same early hours, keeping an eye on ingredient costs that shift with the market. None of this is meant to sound intimidating. It's meant to sound like exactly what it is, a real business with real systems that rewards the people who pay attention to it. The bakers who thrive aren't the ones who never have a hard week. They're the ones who built habits, daily numbers, weekly reviews, honest conversations with themselves about what's working, that catch small problems while they're still small. Now let's talk about where the real growth happens, because this is genuinely one of the most exciting parts of this business once you're established. Wholesale accounts, as we touched on, can add thousands of dollars a month in steady, predictable revenue, and they make fuller use of your kitchen during hours you might otherwise be sitting idle. Catering is another strong path. Corporate breakfast orders, wedding cakes, event platters, often carrying gross margins of 50 to 60%, considerably richer than your everyday retail sale is because customers paying for a custom order expect and accept a premium price. Some bakers build subscription programs where loyal customers get a standing weekly order of their favorite bread, steady, dependable, and it turns occasional customers into a predictable revenue base you can actually plan around. So here's a question worth genuinely getting excited about. Once your core bakery is running well, which of these paths sounds most like you? The relationship building of wholesale accounts, the creative challenge of custom catering, or the loyalty building of a subscription program? Because you don't have to choose just one, and the bakers who build the most resilient businesses usually end up layering 2 or 3 of these together over time. So let's come back to the real question underneath everything we've covered, the one that actually determines whether this becomes a lasting business or a beautiful idea that quietly fades. It's not, can I bake good bread? If you're dreaming about this, there's a real chance you already can, or you're willing to learn. The real question is, am I willing to learn the numbers behind the craft as closely as I've learned the craft itself? That's genuinely learnable. It's not a talent you either have or don't. It's a habit built one weekly review, one waste log, one honest look at your numbers at a time. And here's the encouraging truth. The bakers who build this habit early aren't smarter or luckier than everyone else chasing this dream. They just decided the math was worth understanding before they needed it to save them. Because here's the thing about the smell of fresh bread pulling people in the door, the regulars who show up every Saturday for the same order, that image is real. People build genuinely wonderful, sustainable lives around this. It exists, and for the bakers who do it with open eyes, it's everything they hoped it would be, and more stable than they expected too. It's not built by the person who fell in love with the golden hour photo and stopped there. It's built by the person who fell in love with the photo and then got curious enough to ask what's actually happening behind it. The waste numbers, the wholesale relationships, the quiet 3 a.m. discipline that nobody photographs. Anyone can bake a beautiful loaf of bread. Building something that keeps paying you back season after season, year after year, that's a completely learnable skill. And it starts with exactly the kind of question you're asking right now. So here's the only question left. Are you ready to learn the business behind the bread before you sign the lease, not after? If this changed how you think about the bakery you've been picturing, that's exactly what this channel is here for. Breaking down the real business behind the dreams everyone romanticizes. If you found this useful, drop a like. It genuinely helps this reach more people asking the same questions. And I want to know in the comments, after everything we just covered, are you still in? Or did the math change how you're thinking about it? Subscribe if you're not already, because we're breaking down another one just like this next time. See you in the next one.